Well, good evening, everyone. I know it's a Thursday night and not a Monday night, but you know what? We have a special guest, and she just can't do Mondays, and it was important to us that she come on with us. So here we are on a Thursday night with episode 5 of History and Whiskey. I am John Cole, of course. With me, my man, Pete Kehoe. How are you today, Pete?
Good, sir. And yourself?
Wonderful. I'm just hanging out down here in my cellar in the basement in Howell, Michigan, just watching my whiskey, age and get ready. I love it. So Justin couldn't join us tonight. He's lost his voice, so sadly he's not around. But Mickey's here, and that's cool. And two of my favorite things happened this week. One, you got to go see a baseball game yesterday, and the Tigers won.
Yes.
And Pete got to play live music in front of real people.
I did, and it was amazing.
So two of my favorite things. Well, we are here today, Whiskey and History, and this particular episode was inspired by a bottle of whiskey that my bosses had given me for my birthday, a 13-year aged Mayor Pingree blend from Valentine in Detroit. And I didn't know who Mayor Pingree was. Oh, we lost Pete for a minute. So I looked him up and I thought, wow, this guy's fascinating. We should drink this whiskey. We should talk about him. And while trying to find somebody who knew a lot about the whiskey, I had a mutual friend, and I'm blanking now, that introduced us virtually, Mickey, and said, I don't know about the whiskey, but she sure as hell knows about the mayor.
Yeah, I can't remember who connected us either.
Yeah.
So whoever it was, thanks.
Absolutely. So I guess I didn't meet up with you. I met up with your mailbox a little bit ago, and I picked up a copy of your book, and you wrote this book called Wicked
I don't know
Detroit.
what's going on.
Well, I hear you now, kind of, Pete. Your internet just seems a little out. But anyways, you wrote this wonderful book called Wicked Detroit, and basically every main road in the city of Detroit is named after a gentleman for the history of Detroit here, and you pretty much wrote about all of them, and kind of, we think of them just as kind of street corners, right? But they were real people, and they were a big part of the history of Detroit, and some of them weren't necessarily the nicest, kindest people, but that's kind of the way of the world of powerful men back in the day. They kind of stepped on people to get where they went, didn't they?
Yeah, I mean, really, the history of Detroit, as told through these 10 characters from its history, really, we started off the same way we kept going, I would say. From the very beginning, Cadillac was swindling people out of property and land and things, and just kept on going right through the years and the centuries.
Yeah. So I'm going to post in the chat where everybody's watching us, Facebook, YouTube, Twitch, Twitter, wherever, a couple of the web pages here, DetroitDrinkHistory.com and ProhibitionDetroit.com. That's you. Tell us about it.
Yeah, so ProhibitionDetroit.com I've been working on for, we're coming up on almost 10 years now. It's a history of Detroit during Prohibition, essentially. So it's a book, it's a website. I did a few years back a historic bar challenge. So I have also been an experienced bartender, as any good historian needs to be, right?
Indeed.
Something's got to pay the bills.
Pete and I have both taken our turn behind the bar, that's for sure.
Yes, yeah, so I did a historic bar challenge where I set myself up to bartend at least one actual real physical shift at each one of Detroit's former speakeasies.
Very cool.
Nice.
Yeah, a lot of fun.
Very cool.
Pete, right before we started, we were talking about Lily's / Painted Lady, and that was a speakeasy during Prohibition. So
yeah.
Taking my
the basement's amazing in that building, at least from what I remember years ago.
Yeah, definitely.
Well, before we dive into the history of how we get up to Mayor Pingree and the characters that preceded him, we like to talk about what's in the glass. Peter, what do you have up there?
I have my old standby tonight, Maker's Mark with a single large cube.
Yes. I was just talking to Darshan, which there'll be a video I'll play. I did an interview with my friend Darsh, who is going to tell us about the actual whiskey Mayor Pingree. We'll play it at the end of the show because we were hoping to do 4 or 5 minutes. We did 10 minutes, and that's a little long to take a break on the podcast. So we'll play it at the end. But we were talking about Maker's Mark and how it's the beautiful thing about it is, it might not be the fancy, flashiest, newest thing, right? But it's solid. It's good. You're not mad if anybody takes your bottle and mixes it with Coke. It's just fine, but it's also excellent straight up. But I stopped at a gas station in the middle of nowhere in the UP about 2 weeks ago, and it was on the shelf behind the bartender or behind the salesperson's bottle of Maker's Mark. You can literally find it anywhere. It's safe. It's
True.
Easy. It's always around. What do you got down there, Mickey?
So I'm double fisting it here. I've got a Chilean Pinot Noir, and then I did stop up at the tasting room in Ferndale this afternoon and got the
rye.
The rye.
Yeah.
Lord knows I've got
nice.
enough bourbon on the shelves right now, so
Right.
I thought I'd give a rye a go.
No, I love it. I unfortunately, of course, didn't get to open the bottle of 13 that we were going to. I had a bottle, which is what is inspired this topic, and I had a friend in need, and I sent it to an auction, and we raised $1,300 for him, so it went to a good cause. But sadly, Pete, I didn't get to drop you off a little mason jar like I was planning on a couple of weeks ago, so I apologize. We're losing Pete a little bit on his internet again, but that's
for
okay.
a good cause.
I bet it was. So I'm going to drink a airplane bottle of Legacy whiskey. Well, yeah, that's going to be good. I promise.
Okay.
Yeah,
I hope so.
Yeah.
I'll take your word for it.
Everything's fine. Everything's fine over here. It's fine. Let's do. I know you have a whole book about it, so we'll talk briefly on it. And for people who want to expand on it, of course, I put the link to your stuff up there. People saw you could find it at your publisher at the beginning of the show. You can reach out to us afterwards if you want to know. We'll put you in touch with how to find it. You can ask your local bookstore to please order it from the publisher. I know Pete's going to do that up in McLean and Egan, one of the greatest bookstores around. So anyways, so let's get started on, I think Cadillac's probably a good place to start. We'll just briefly go with Cadillac and we'll move on to maybe Woodward and Campow because those are all big names, and we'll catch up to where Mayor Pingree is. So take us to the little fur trading spot that later became the Paris of the Midwest.
Yeah, so honestly, Cadillac sold this idea of Detroit that none of us who actually live in Detroit could possibly recognize. When he's writing these letters back to the court in France, he's talking about how you can grow the best Burgundian wines here. That all these places, it's full of all these magical fruits and citrus. It never snows in the city on the Straits. Or, in the settlement on the Straits. So he's making all these absolutely wild claims that, Detroit was essentially founded on a series of lies. So, yeah.
No, it's fascinating. And then I know that for a guy, I grew up north with Pete and Petoskey, and I live in Howell, so not really close to Detroit by any means. But one of the things when I first started selling beer as a brewery rep down in Detroit was just kind of the wackiness of the layout of the town.
Yeah.
And
thank Woodward for that one.
Yeah, right. So then I got to your chapter on Woodward and how he had kind of based it on basically like Paris, where there's just these kind of geometrical, like kind of triangles and pinwheels, and that it was made so every time you expand it, you just add another like geometric section and plop it down in there. And what a grand idea for what was it, middle of the
1805.
Yeah, 1805, the beginning of the 1800s, like just to have this vision to make this grand city out of basically a trading post.
Yeah, and in 1805, Woodward writes a plan and he designs a city that will hold 5 million people. Now, no city anyone knows has 5 million people in it in 1805.
I mean, does Detroit have 5 million people now?
No,
right?
It doesn't even have 1 million. anymore. So, he's got these grand schemes, but he runs right up against the actual people that actually live in Detroit, which was a farming village at the time. And what they wanted more than anything else wasn't grand parkways and boulevards. They wanted access to the river so that they could water their crops. So he tries to build these streets and these intersecting, boulevards and parks and things like that. And people just completely and totally ignore him because their property is the long, narrow ribbon farms. And so they don't really care what Woodward's roads are supposed to do. So that's how we sort of end up with downtown, this grid pattern over top of a spoken wheel pattern.
Yeah, it's a strange place with all the one-way streets and turnarounds. And when I was trying to get used to selling beer down there, I got lost a lot. Pete, have you spent a lot of time in Detroit?
I did. And playing, back in the day, I used to play at the Magic Stick and if you don't know downtown Detroit and you're uninitiated, you can, especially before the days of, Google Maps on your phone, you could be screwed. And you can get turned around and end up west of Grand River, in some neighborhoods that you didn't want to be in, very easily,
Oh, man. I'm telling you, it never happened to me, but there's a good friend of mine, another beer rep in the state that lives over on the west side and was coming over to visit Detroit. And he's like on Facebook. He's like, I don't know what just happened, but I'm in line to get in Canada. And I don't know how I got here. Because you certainly can be trying to get into town and take that downtown exit. And if you don't get off that highway, you literally are staring at customs and they don't like when you turn around.
Yeah. Yep. That's the one exit on 96 that it's like, oh no, you're going to Canada, whether you want to or not right now.
Have fun. See you over there.
Yep.
And honestly, Pete, you said something about Google Maps. I don't know if it's any better now, but when I was doing a lot of sales down there, when I was working for Saugatuck Brewing Company, the buildings messed with the GPS. So that didn't help you. So you ended up having to just kind of zoom into the map and look at street signs in the old fashioned way, trying to figure out. And that was only 8 years ago. I couldn't get Google Maps to work down there to save my life. So.
Yeah. I used to print out MapQuest maps. Actually, that's 20 years ago or whatever.
Sure. No, it's fascinating, and I guess it hasn't really changed, Mickey, that much. That power really was inherited and who you knew.
Oh yeah.
When they sent all these people over from the East Coast to come be our territory governors and stuff, these people didn't have any experience. They didn't know what they were doing. They just they had a cousin who was this person's brother who was that person's sister, and they're like, hey, you've got power, money, and influence. You're going to Michigan.
Yeah, and half of them didn't even want to be there.
Oh, for sure.
Woodward, Hull, half of these guys saw Detroit as a backwater that they had to endure before they could get, promoted to the positions that they really wanted back east. And that showed in the early years of Detroit and the kind of neglect that we suffered from, I think, because of all of these territorial judges and controllers who just really didn't care anything about the people that lived.
I don't think much has changed. They were just super blatant about it. When the governor and the judge came over and they ran, Woodward and Hull, and they basically okay, we need to build this. Which one of your cousins or friends are we going to pay to do it, and pay them 5 times the going amount to do it? And then we're going to collect 30% of that back in private taxes. And it was just so corrupt. And then fast forward a little bit, you get to the people that ran the bars and taverns and how that really was the center of politics, where these guys that owned these taverns, those were kind of the self-made men. Those weren't necessarily the people who came into money. They ran a little tavern and ended up, getting the influence over the people working the boats and really navigating the votes for people. And it took a lot of power from the right amount of people to kind of wrestle that away from these basically innkeepers who were in charge of who was getting elected, kind of union bosses of sorts.
Oh, yeah, very much so. I mean, especially starting in the 1840s when we start to see more immigrants coming into Detroit after the Erie Canal opens up and you've got all the Great Lakes shipping happening. These saloon and tavern owners really did run their little fiefdoms. They're the tavern or the bar is the social center for everybody. If you're an immigrant, you go to the bar where they sell the beer you recognize and they speak the language that you recognize. And you go there and you cash your checks and you find out, where to get a new job. Maybe you find a place to live.
Mm-hmm.
So the kind of power that gets consolidated by these tavern owners and saloon keepers is pretty impressive. And they sort of carry that over into the running of the city government in the early. So by the time Hayes and Pingree comes along, the city is run by the mayor and then the common council, which is sort of like city council, but it's a little bit different.
Mm-hmm.
It has 16 different wards, so these little geographic sections of town. And each ward has 2 aldermen who serve on the city council, essentially.
Mm-hmm.
And those guys are made up of saloon keepers or whoever the saloon keeper wants to elect to office.
Sure.
So
kind of an ancient form of gerrymandering.
Yeah. Yeah, and the kind of stunts that they would pull on election day are legendary.
Right? Yeah, I mean, it just mostly my knowledge comes from your book. Look, I'm not a history guy. I'm the most prepared for this show that I've been for any of the previous 6 because I read your book. So the whole shtick with this is my buddy Justin. He's just a history buff, and I'm so sad he's not here because I know that he's always entertaining. But this is what would happen: is we grew up together. He moved away. He came back. 30 years in between seeing this guy, and we just started hanging out at the bar, having a glass of whiskey, and then inevitably he'd catch a little buzz and start telling me about the Civil War or World War I or something, and I'd just go, or I know the basic facts that might pop up when you click Wikipedia open, and most of that isn't really true or right. So he'd be like, yeah, a lot of people think that, but this is what really happened. And I said, man, we should start a podcast and just this is what it should be.
Yeah.
So here we are. This is how it happened. But I read your book, so I feel like empowered this time. But no, it was fascinating because all these people, they work they'd go off for months and work and they'd come back. Well, they don't have a house. So they'd live in these inns with these barkeepers. And the barkeepers are basically like, hey, your meal's on me. You're going to vote for the person I tell you to vote for. Hey, you don't have to pay rent this month because it's election month and you're going to vote the way I want. Or you have to pay me rent.
Early and often. Yes.
Yes. Yeah. And it was really fascinating. And just kind of the even all the way down to, the camp-outs with the horse racing and just greed begets greed begets greed. And then, you've got all these just miserable people that basically ran and took charge of things. And then you get Mayor Pingree in. And Mayor Pingree is kind of like Harvey Dent of Batman, right? He wanted to come in and clean it up.
Yeah. Yeah, this guy was... I think in Detroit, we've sort of accepted, Pingree was amazing and he was great, but we don't really pay enough heed to just how absolutely revolutionary he is in the late 19th century. The kinds of policies that he's advocating for still haven't been put into place, even though a lot of people want them to be put into place. And the kinds of machine politics that he's fighting up against. This is the boss Tweed era of politicking. And this is the big bosses running the town just down to every single city contract. And Pingree comes in and he's got 0 experience as a politician and he's got very little education. We're not sure he had even the equivalent of a high school education, but he is fired up. And he just comes through and just sweeping changes and pisses everybody off and just does a lot of good at a time when the city really, really needed it.
So how did he come into power and influence? It seems like everybody else in that book, they've got their father or back in Spain or, someone's got all this power and prestige. And you look at Campow and he was like the 4th Campow and you look at, all the, where did Pingree come from?
Maine, of all places. His parents were farmers in Maine, and his father was also a cobbler on the side. And so Pingree learned that from his father, and then he started first in Saco, Maine, and then in Hopkinton, Massachusetts, and he worked in shoe factories. And he was a leather cutter at a shoe factory. And
so I don't know how effectual he was in the Civil War, but he has an interesting history.
Yeah. He was... he was one of the very first people in 1862 from Hopkinton to sign up to be in the Civil War. So he volunteered and he went down, and he was in a couple of battles and didn't see a whole lot of straight action, but he was captured and served, or was prisoner at the infamous Andersonville prison.
Yeah.
Yeah, and then I saw he escaped by answering the name of a roll call of a prisoner exchange that wasn't his.
I have heard that.
Yeah.
I haven't been able to track down that reference.
Right? I was reading your book, and then, of course, he's only a minor feature of your book, because your book really focuses on the villains of the history of Detroit, not necessarily the icon of Detroit. But his Wikipedia page is fascinating. Basically, it says he gets captured. He's trying to escape. They do a roll call for a prisoner exchange. Somebody doesn't answer the name, so he says, "Nope, that's me." He gets exchanged, ends up with who was the general he ended up with? I'm blanking.
Sherman.
Was that
Sherman?
Sherman? Yes,
Sherman.
He ended up with Sherman. Ends up at the at a couple of the famous battles. Ends up being in the room when Robert E. Lee surrenders.
He's the Forrest Gump of the Civil War,
Right? So is it all true? I don't know. It's hard to say, because I couldn't really find a whole lot of references outside of Wikipedia. But Pete, the man's a fascinating man. I know your internet's been struggling a little bit. So,
you know what? I've never had this problem when we've done this before, John. I have no idea what's going on. I'm blaming it on Spectrum. So, very kind of illustrious Civil War career. He was in a lot of major battles, and not only was he in Andersonville, but after he did the whole prisoner exchange escape kind of, assuming the other identity, he went back to his regiment and fought out the rest of the war. He had another year left, and then ended up at Appomattox with Robert E. Lee and Grant, for the surrender. And,
crazy.
And that was corroborated. Well, I don't know. It was in the Detroit News article that I read about him, I think, maybe, along with Wikipedia. But he was a go-getter and just, a firebrand, apparently. I mean, that's what seemed to characterize the guy his whole life, is that he just did what he thought was right and really fought and really walked the walk instead of just, talk the talk. So,
and what's fascinating is how he got his wealth before he was mayor of Detroit. Was, from what I understand, is he moved to Detroit. He became a partner in a shoe company. The partner retired. He took it over, and over 20 years grew it to $1 million company in the 1800s. That's insane.
Yeah. So he was a big business owner. But one sort of side note that I don't want us to get too bogged down in, but it's just fascinating. His partner, Charles Smith, I swear to God, was a character in some kind of weird spy novel, because the man staged his own death. He was at a dinner party. There was a knock on the door, and he went to answer it and was never seen again. So his widow had to go through the courts for years and say, well, we need to declare him dead. He's just gone. He disappeared without a trace. We don't know what happened to him. 15 years later, he reappears as a dock laborer in New York City, and Hazen Pingree has been paying for him to live basically all of this time. He basically, so this is Charles Smith, he just got he got sick of his life and was like, nah, screw this, and just left, just up and left. It's so bizarre. And I found that in a footnote of a book, I think in one of John Lodge's autobiography, but just such a strange story. But yeah, so Pingree owns this shoe factory, this very, very successful shoe factory. And one of his earliest experiences there I guess not one of the earliest, but in 1885, I think it is, his employees go on strike because they want better wages, shorter hours, that kind of stuff. And the strike drags on for a year. And Pingree refuses to negotiate. And it drags on. Finally, they have to call in an arbitrator. It gets arbitrated. Everybody is equally unhappy with the situation. And what Pingree takes away from that experience is, I should have arbitrated right from the beginning. I should have spoken directly to employees. Yeah, it does.
Because he was one of the early advocates for, 5 days work, 8 hours a day, end child labor.
Yeah. Yeah. In 1891, the streetcar workers in Detroit are rioting. And in fact, the people, the citizens of Detroit are rioting right there with them. J.L. Hudson sends out his employees with revolvers to defend them. He makes them sandwiches. So they're knocking over streetcars because the streetcar employees were working 81 hours a week, and they had asked to work 72 hours a week instead. And the streetcar company owners refused to allow it. So they went on strike, and the city pretty much went with them and said, yeah, absolutely. So they knocked streetcars over, dragged one of them out into the river. So, yeah, it was a wild scene. And Pingree refused, and the sort of standard operating procedure at this point is to call in the National Guard or to call in the Army. And Pingree says, no, absolutely not. I am not putting the National Guard against the citizens. Which, we've seen directly in the last couple of years, this kind of debate, what do we use the National Guard for in cases of civil unrest?
Yeah.
So
it's really fascinating. And I know it wasn't his philosophy, and it's in our show notes, which I, of course, don't have up. But one of his philosophies was, I'm going to have to look it up now. I think it's in our private chat. You put it up there, didn't you? Maybe not. Yeah, I got to find it. Anyways, one of his philosophies was basically the working family needed to be protected. The working family was the backbone. I think that you're right. I think the strike and what happened to him at his factory kind of opened his eyes to, hey, I became a multimillionaire, and it was off the backs of these people. And he wanted to take care of those people. So he belonged to this belief that basically taxes needed to not be applied to the lower middle class to the lower class people, that wealth was really, at that time, the only way you had wealth was really land ownership. Mm-hmm. And the landlords were brutal, of course, in the 1800s, in the early 1900s. And they believed that taxes should be on land and not necessarily on sales and not on income. And it should really only go to infrastructure and social networks.
Right.
And that's fascinating in the 1800s to have a man of power basically say, you shouldn't keep giving me money. You guys should have the money.
Yeah. I mean, this is the Gilded Age, and he could very well have been a robber baron. He's a big factory owner. Pingree's shoe factory was the second largest in the country.
Yeah.
It was huge.
I saw at the height he was selling something, or he had 700 employees in the mid 1800s. That's insane.
Yeah.
The company grew from eight employees, I believe, to over 700. And the interesting parallel I find with Pingree is Teddy Roosevelt at the same time. Came from wealth and privilege, and was the and along with Pingree, the monopoly buster. Fighting for the common guy, even though they came from wealth and privilege. I mean, there were a few people that were doing that at the same time, and he also actually supported McKinley. He was instrumental in getting McKinley reelected with regard to Michigan's vote too. I had to throw that in there. So,
I love it, and he just, for me, like I'm right along with those things. Like he believed that privatization of public utilities was the death of everyone. That utilities and what benefited the common man needed to be public owned, not private owned. Mm-hmm. And we're still fighting that battle today.
Right. Yeah, he advocated for municipal ownership of things like gas companies, utilities, the streetcars, of course. But because of the way that these systems were set up, the gas company in Detroit had a 50-year franchise. They signed a contract where basically they were the sole providers of gasoline, and this is, or gas. This is when everything was done with, all the lighting was natural gas, for 50 years. So of course they can hike the prices up to whatever they want. And in Detroit, gas prices were almost twice everything else. And in other cities, they were twice what Cleveland's were. So they're just exploiting and exploiting and exploiting. This is at the absolute worst possible time, because the panic of 1893 was, until the Great Depression hits, 50 years later, 40 years later, was the worst depression the country had ever seen. So the panic of people were on the verge of starvation in Detroit when the Panic of 1893 hit. So the difference between a 5-cent rail fare and a 3-cent rail fare is significant. And this, of course, is when
you consider. Oh, I'm sorry. Go ahead.
Oh, I was going to say, and this is when he institutes the famous potato patches.
Oh, yes. And a pound of beef in 1900 was 3 cents.
Wow.
So that gives you, a barometer of like what that was worth as far as the streetcar prices go. But yeah, the potato patch, urban farming. He invented urban farming, pretty much.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. It was actually, I do have to say this, it was his wife's idea.
Oh.
His daughter recalled years later that they had been taking a carriage ride through the city, and his wife had said, boy, it just seems to make so much sense that so many of the folks that are out of work, 50%, unemployment among immigrants in Detroit was at 50% during the Panic of 1893. So she says, they all came from farms. They're all farmers. And we have so much empty land here in Detroit. It just seems like we should be able to put those two together. And they did.
Wow.
Always a great idea behind a great man, isn't there? Always. Yeah. My wife and I talk about it quite a bit. And we were just kind of laughing because I was reading not only your book, but a few other things where they were talking about, women's rights to vote and how even some of these great characters in history who were wonderful people at the time, they're like, well, we can't have women voting. If they vote and they don't agree with their husband, it'll cause marital issues and it'll break the foundation of their family values. And so women can't vote because we can't have the husband and wife arguing over a vote.
Over politics.
Right.
Exactly.
Yeah. Or, what should happen if they vote differently from the man?
Oh, God.
Yeah. No, it's just fascinating topic. And I love that part of history and how it was so obvious for so long, all these rights that need to be done and how many decades it took to get it done. It's always a fascinating subject.
Mm-hmm.
Now, the other thing that I found interesting about Pingree was that he made known and he took pains to make it known that he was not a teetotaler, and that there was a big movement against alcohol going at that time, and he kind of befriended people and the saloon owners, and that was one of the ways that he kind of kept, his 4 consecutive terms in Detroit. That and the fact that he enlisted the support of the Polish people. And ended up buying I think he bought a German newspaper as well to help bolster his popularity in the German community, right? And
that's
he
funny.
wasn't German, not that I know of.
He bought a German newspaper, fired the old editor, put in his own guy, and all of a sudden he was endorsed for governor then.
Brilliant.
Amazing.
Yeah.
Speaking of that, he had the distinction of being elected governor while still the mayor of Detroit and tried to hold on to both jobs.
Yeah.
That's true.
So we're not that far away from machine politics, are we?
Right.
It's like, I don't see any
that's
problem
true.
with being both.
No, it's fine. It's like, and I can be the Supreme Court justice of Michigan at the same time. Everything's fine.
No problem at all.
He almost pulled it off, though. It was finally deemed unconstitutional in the state constitution, but almost pulled it off.
Yeah. Thankfully, yeah.
Awesome. Well, any last thoughts we haven't touched on that you want to touch on Pingree, Mickey, before we get to the interview with Darsh and talk about the wonderful liquor that our friends at Valentine have been aging and blending?
I mean, I think it's just the absolutely revolutionary nature of Pingree's ideas then and even still today. I mean, he's proposing New Deal style reforms and projects and WPA type projects in the city of Detroit 50 years before anybody else does. And it just, I think we could learn a lot even still today from Pingree's ideas on municipalities and on urban reform, really.
Yeah. Pete, anything else from you, sir?
I found it very refreshing that the man did not kowtow to party politics. and veered wildly outside of them and garnered a huge following with the populace. I mean, like the working man, and this is all, and we forget, I think, that this is all prior to the industrialization, the true industrialization of Detroit, where there was a huge, after him, there was a huge influx of immigrants that he tapped into. He was very prescient as far as a lot of his, his methodologies, and he foresaw a lot of the future. I think he had a looking glass, man, that he was looking through, and he saw a lot of things way before a lot of other people did. I was very impressed in doing my research about this guy. So,
yeah, he's absolutely fascinating, and I can't wait to dig deeper into him afterwards. He's right up my political alley, personally. So I love it. All right, well, thank you so much for joining us. We have a couple of things to keep up here. Again, please go check out her book, Wicked Detroit. The post has been posted in the chat room, so you can see where to find that. Also, the next show is 11 days away, Pete, not 14.
Oh, boy.
You're super excited. May 24th, we're going to talk about the Mormon King of Beaver Island.
I have a lot of information and knowledge about that guy.
All right. Before that day, we're going to upgrade your internet. We're going to get you a direct internet connection instead of your Wi-Fi, and we're going to.
I'm so close to the Wi-Fi. That's not the issue. John, come on now. I have never had problems before tonight, correct?
You know what? It's always with me trying to help you out. That's when your problems come. I think I'm just a bad luck charm for you.
I think you are.
Well, I hope everything works well with Justin and you, because I don't know anything about that topic, so I'm not going to be helpful leading that conversation.
Well, he and I will put the, we'll get on the Google Drive and put like an outline together between the two of us, definitely. So.
Well, I love it. Well, stick around, guys. I'm going to play an interview that I did with my friend Darshan, and he's going to talk about the bottle of liquor that inspired the show, the 13-year aged Mayor Pingree from Valentine. And it's a special bottle, very highly sought after and difficult to find. So I hope you enjoy that interview. Mickey Lyons, thank you so much for joining us. And hopefully I get to have a beverage with you in person one of these days.
Yeah, someday soon. Cheers.
I would absolutely love it. Pete, thank you so much. Cheers. If you want to stick around and watch the interview, I'll chat with you after the show.
All right.
All right. Love it.
Thank you.
Let's see. Did I load it in here? Of course I didn't load it in here. So I'm going to play our commercial break and then load that video in here. So thanks again, guys. All right. I found it, Pete. Are you ready?
Excellent.
All right, here we go. Enjoy my friend Darsh and I talking about Mayor Pingree whiskey from our friends Valentine down in Detroit. And if anybody wants to have a cheers after it, the link is in the comments. You're welcome to join us after this brief 10-minute interview. Enjoy. Well, I'd really like to welcome in a guest today on the History and Whiskey Show. My good friend, Darsh. How are you, buddy?
I'm doing well. How are you, Jonathan?
You know, I am enjoying life in my cellar. I checked a couple of these barrels earlier. They're not quite there, but get a couple more years, and I think we can start kind of blending them in.
I like it. Just got to keep an eye on them.
That's right. You know, I keep it nice and dark and dank down here. Howell, Michigan is an underrated place to cellar some bourbon barrels.
I've heard that it's like in the Goldilocks zone of whiskey aging. So
it truly is.
Yeah.
So I, of course, is sadly not really where I'm at, but you really are in front of those beautiful bottles, and I love it, my friend. I love it.
Thank you. Yeah, I've been quality testing a lot of these bottles. That's why some of them are near the end of their useful life, but. This shelf was kind of built in. This house was built, I think, in like 1970, and
nice.
Probably housed some really ugly figurines at some point. So I thought I would make something a little more useful out of it.
Spruce it up a little bit.
That's right.
Well, I appreciate you coming on. Of course, we're recording this a little early, but the show is live. We're taking a little break right now to talk to you. We are knee deep in the history of Detroit and how it got built and the powerful men that made it happen in their unscrupulous ways, really. I don't know if you know much of the history of Cadillac and Woodward and Campow and all the great streets of Detroit have a person behind them. They weren't particularly nice people.
I believe you, and you know what? That's why I got to watch the podcast more often, so I can learn
Right.
kind of stuff. You know?
Well, Mickey Lyons is a wealth of knowledge. I'm glad that she has joined us, and I can't wait to finish the show. But in the meantime, we are going to get talking about Mayor Pingree, the man, who was a very progressive mayor of Detroit and pushed for a lot of things that society is still pushing for now, breaking down monopolies and very, very cautious of the greed of corporations and really wanted the power to be with the people and not with the corporations. And that was, the end of the 1800s or the beginning of the 1900s. So he was championing things we're still fighting for now, right? But he's really a hero and an iconic image of not only the Civil War, but the state of Michigan. He was the mayor of Detroit. He was the governor of Michigan for a period as well. And our friends down at Valentine dedicate a certain particular blend of their whiskey to Mr. Hazen S. Pingree. So can you tell us a little bit about it?
Well, that's what I'm drinking right now, the Mayor Pingree 13-year Black Label, which is a blend. I'm far from a Mayor Pingree whiskey expert, but I would certainly consider myself to be an enthusiast. I'll be the first to admit I don't know a ton about the history of the mayor himself, but as far as the whiskey goes, I've spent plenty of time with Justin Aiden, the distiller there, and someone who really, really knows his stuff, and top to bottom is very, very passionate about what he does, him and Rufino Valentine both. This particular blend of whiskey is multiple MGP barrels, the youngest of which would have been 13 years old, in different proportions. And micro blending is something that takes a lot of talent to do because you're not just relying on pulling a really good barrel. You're blending things together and looking for a great expression, which this absolutely is. And it's one of multiple blends that they've done and one of many, I think, to come.
Yeah, sadly, I had a bottle, and it was a wonderful gift from my bosses at Witch's Hat Brewing for my birthday this year. It's autographed by John and Vito, and just a beautiful thing. And as you know, and I reached out for a little support from you and some people you knew, I had a friend who was in need, and we needed to raise some money and fast for him. And I thought, you know what? Some things are more important than whiskey. So I auctioned off my beautiful bottle without even opening it. For a minute, I thought about asking the guy who won if I could pull a quick dram off of it, but I decided not to. So I'm glad you're here because I wanted somebody to open it, drink it, tell us what it tasted like. And since I couldn't do it, I'm so happy that you heaped our call. So tell us a little bit about it. What's it tasting like right now? What's the predominant notes and the feel of it, and what do you compare it to maybe some bigger national scale whiskeys that are out there?
Sure. Well, first, I'll backtrack for a second and say that my bottle is always open to you. So like I told you, kind of before the show, when you want to jump on the iLogic helicopter and make your way over here, there's always a pour waiting for you.
I like it.
But this particular bottle, a lot of the Mayor Pingree stuff that's come out, it doesn't necessarily compare to some of the national things and brands that you'll find on the shelf. And that's one of the things that's kind of cool about it is it can be very unique. This particular one, you've got kind of this clove cigarette kind of nose to it. And then it has kind of on the underbelly, some grape must, nutmeg, baking spices, a little bit of chocolate, and it drinks big. It's a slick whiskey. It has great mouthfeel, great linger, and a long finish. And those are a lot of things that at least people like me look for in the American whiskey that we drink.
Mm-hmm. So they have multiple different kinds of that. You mentioned Black Label. I was at a store earlier today, saw the Orange Label. What can you tell me the differences between the different batches? Is it just the minimum age blend that they added?
Well, there can be layers of differences. So what you saw when you went to the store as an Orange Label was actually a rye. So it's a blended rye. It's going to be a pretty friendly, approachable rye that you can drink. The Red Label counterpart to it is a bourbon, and that's a blended bourbon. This, if you see the Black Label, it's usually kind of a special small batch blend or a micro blend. And then they have blue labels. The blue labels are always single barrels. So it's just kind of an easy way for me to tell what's what.
Oh, that's fantastic, man. Much success to those guys. I've tried a lot of they started off kind of with a bang and hit the world with vodka really hard before they started really coming out with the whiskeys. And you did mention that this is, they don't distill the Mayor Pingree. It is brought in, but they blend it in their own barrels, age it, get it to the taste that they want. That for a while was kind of a no-no in the industry to be known for getting like the Indiana liquor, right? But now it's like there's people out there, and I liken this to Speciation in Grand Rapids, the brewers. He doesn't brew his own beer. He buys in wort from other people because to him, the magic is in the fermentation and it is in the barrel aging and it's in the blending. And he doesn't care about the brewing of it. I feel like it's become kind of more commonplace now, is it? You see some of these nice higher end stuff that aren't necessarily distilled at the place you buy them from, but they are still a beautiful product because they have to age it. They have to keep it in the right condition. They have to have a master blender and taster to make sure it's smooth and delicious.
Well, so to backtrack for a second, I mean, they are distilling, right? I think that the key thing is they wanted to make sure that their distillate was of the quality and the maturity that it needed to be before they started releasing it. So the easiest thing to do is to, bring in really high quality barrels and sit on them. So, you're kind of tending to them like a shepherd in their flock of barrels, and testing them and making sure that they're mature. And then obviously wherever they're being held or wherever those barrels are living, the DNA of that area is going to impart something on those barrels as well, right? Because you've got ambient humidity, temperature, all kinds of different things that are going to kind of contribute to that. So I think they've done a really good job kind of curating barrels, and releasing them in anticipation of when, their own distillate is going to be the main thing that they have. And obviously the gin and the vodka and all that stuff is really, really top notch. So,
oh man, their barrel aged gin, I could just die for it, man.
It's fantastic. Yeah.
One of my favorite things, and I know it's almost heresy, but Witch's Hat's blueberry lemonade goza is I would take their barrel aged gin on the rocks and just put a splash of that blueberry goza over top of it and just to brighten up that flavor. And it goes so well with those botanicals. But that barrel aged gin, man, I could drink that like all day, every day.
I'll tell you, and they've had a couple special edition ones too. Really, really cool stuff. I love Negronis. It's probably one of my favorite classic cocktails. So any iteration of that using barrel aged gins or anything like that to me is always a welcome thing on my bar. So I'm with you.
I love it, man. Well, I know that what you're drinking is a lot better than the single malt whiskey out of Virginia that I have in my hand. But like I said, taking a seat right now and just wanted to run to the store and grab whatever was in an airplane bottle for the show today. So I got rid of everything for that auction. So, I got to stock back up again.
Absolutely. Listen, you got to drive a beater every once in a while if you want to really appreciate a Ferrari, right? So I think you're doing it for the people. I can appreciate that,
I love it. Well, Darsh, we'll have you back again sometime for another whiskey or beverage topic. And I really appreciate your time. Thank you so much for coming on and joining us here at Whiskey and History.
Thank you, Jonathan. I appreciate the time.
All right. Cheers, my friend.
All right.
Well, that was my friend Darsh, Pete.
Hey, he seemed cool. Can't wait to meet him.
He's got a hell of a rack of booze behind him, didn't he?
Yes, he did.
I love it. We talked about me coming to visit, and I don't know if you're familiar with the show Hot Ones, where they interview celebrities and eat progressively hotter hot wings.
Yes.
So
I am.
As you know, am not a Scotch guy. I've been a bourbon drinker since I was 21, and I'm 40 now, and everybody has always said, you got to drink Scotch. Well, I've never just been that guy, and I think it was because I was introduced to like the extreme peated stuff immediately, and it just kind of ruined it for me. So we got the idea that when I go visit him, that we're going to do Hot Ones Scotch edition with John, where we start with the most mild Scotch and work our way all the way up to the most extreme peated in like little quarter-ounce tasters and watch my face progressively get and a little drunker as we go.
It's actually a good idea. And some of the lighter scotches, man, I'm not a big Scotch fan either. Irish whiskeys, yes. And I'm half Irish. I'm actually 3/4 Irish and a quarter Scottish. So I should have a love for Scotch, but just the Highland single malts, the more heathery kind of stuff. Dalwhinnie, if you've ever had that, that's a very palatable on the very light end, and that's where you should start. Kind of with those things. And but I know what you're talking about, like Lagavulin. That's like eating a spoonful of dirt. Yeah, Lafroig. Oh yeah, same thing.
Yep, that's like a cat urine. It has that like ammonia smell.
Yeah, it's a spoonful of like cat litter. Yeah.
All right, buddy. Well, there's some listeners, some watchers, some viewers, but nobody wanted to join us for a cheers today. So cheers to you, sir.
Cheers to you, sir. Thanks for having me aboard once again.
I love it. And don't forget, May 24th, the Mormon King of Beaver Island.
I'll be more than prepared. I'm already prepared, but I'm going to even be more prepared. So.
I love it. Well, we'll see you then, my friend. Cheers.
All right, brother. Take care. Thank you.